The Battle of Midway, a battle that turned the tide for the American forces. Here's how a lucky break and the forethought of Admiral Jack Spruance earned the American fleet a decisive victory. At 16:24 hours on the afternoon of June 3rd, B-17 bombers from the Midway take the first shot at the Japanese, making 3 high-level passes over the Japanese ships. They miss with every bomb. Prior to the Battle of Midway, Admiral Nagumo's fleet was fortunate to be sheltered from view by clouds and fog. As a matter of fact, when Nagumo wanted to give the signal to change course toward Midway, he had to break radio silence because the fog was so thick the ships couldn't see one another. Because of this cover, Nagumo was able to avoid detection until 3 June. At 01:43 hours on the 4th of June, 4 torpedo planes from the Midway drop 3 torpedoes and claim 1 hit, the oiler Akebono Maru. The ship is damaged and loses 23 men, but doesn't turn back. At 06:03 hours, a PBY from Midway spots a portion of the Japanese fleet, 2 carriers and 2 battleships. The Japanese are now 180 miles from Midway, and the U.S. fleet is 200 miles away from the Japanese. At 07:02 hours, the U.S. carriers Hornet and Enterprise launched 20 Wildcats, 67 dive bombers, and 29 torpedo bombers against the Japanese fleet. At 07:10 hours, Midway-based torpedo planes flying without fighter protection attacked the Japanese carriers Akagi and Hiryu. All of their torpedoes miss or are neutralized by the Japanese, and 8 of the 10 planes are shot down. At 08:30 hours, 11 more Midway-based bombers attempt to attack the Japanese carriers, but meet with so much resistance, they divert their attack to the battleship Haruna. Again, there are no hits, and 2 planes are lost. At 09:17 hours, the Japanese Admiral Nagumo completes the recovery of the Midway attack planes and sets course for the American carriers. Nagumo leaves his returning planes on the carrier deck as he reloads and refuels them, which is exactly what Admiral Spruance hopes he will do. At 09:27 hours, 30 American torpedo bombers with fighter escort head for the Japanese fleet. 15 of the bombers and all of the fighters get lost because the Japanese fleet has changed course. When the remaining 15 bombers attack the Japanese fleet without fighter protection, all of them are shot down without recording a single hit. 29 of the 30 crewmen perish. At 09:30 hours, 14 torpedo planes attack the Japanese carrier Kaga. 10 are shot down, and all of the torpedoes miss. At 09:55 hours, the Americans' luck finally changes. While searching for the Japanese fleet, dive bombers spot the destroyer Arashi, which has fallen behind the fleet. The pilots trust a hunch and follow the destroyer's heading right into the heart of the Japanese fleet. At 10:00 hours, the Yorktown launches 12 bombers against the Japanese carrier Soryu. 10 of the 12 bombers are shot down, and no hits are recorded. At 10:25 hours, dive bombers from the Yorktown attack the Soryu. 3 bombs strike, 1 piercing the flight deck forward of the superstructure, 1 in the middle of the planes being rearmed and refueled, and 1 next to the elevator. Within minutes, the Soryu is engulfed in flames. At 10:26 hours, dive bombers from Enterprise and Hornet strike the Japanese carrier Akagi with 3 bombs. Although the first hit causes only minor damage, the second bomb detonates in a hangar full of torpedoes, and the third hits the flight deck in the middle of the planes being rearmed and refueled. The Akagi bursts into flames. Admiral Spruance's superior planning had as much to do with the success of the Battle of Midway as anything else. Spruance had originally planned to launch his first attack on the Japanese fleet at 0900 hours. But when he heard about the attack on Midway, he decided to launch his strike force 2 hours earlier in the hope of catching the Japanese with flight decks full of refueling, rearming planes, which of course is exactly what happened. At 10:30 hours, the Kaga is struck by 4 bombs. One hits just in front of the island, killing everyone on the bridge, while the other 3 strike the rearming and refueling planes on deck and penetrate to the bomb storage and gasoline storage areas. Like the Soryu and the Akagi, the Kaga quickly goes up in flames. At 1200 hours, 6 Japanese dive bombers managed to elude Wildcats and anti-aircraft fire to score 3 hits on the Yorktown. The Yorktown's flight deck and boilers are damaged. With only 1 boiler operational, the Yorktown is immobilized. At 13:59 hours, not long after the Soryu's crew contains her fires, the U.S. submarine Nautilus launches 3 successful torpedo attacks. The Soryu is again engulfed in flames. At 14:42 hours, the Yorktown is struck by 2 torpedoes from the Hiryu's attack group. The torpedoes hold the carrier's port fuel tanks, causing the carrier to lift 23 degrees to port. The crew abandons the Yorktown. At 1700 hours, the SBDs from the Enterprise attack the Hiryu. 4 hits knock out the island and start tremendous fires. Rear Admiral Yamaguchi, in line to be Admiral Yamamoto's successor, is killed in the attack, a serious loss for the Japanese command. At 1920, shortly after her gasoline storage explodes, the Soryu sinks. At 1925, the still-burning Kaga explodes and sinks. At 03:42 hours on June 5th, a Japanese column of 4 cruisers and 2 destroyers spots the U.S. submarine Tambor. In executing an emergency turn to avoid the Tambor, the cruisers Mogami and Mikuma collide and sustain heavy damage. At 0500 hours, a Japanese destroyer sinks the helpless carrier Akagi. At 0900 hours, 3 hours and 50 minutes after first being hit, the Japanese carrier Hiryu sinks. The Hiryu was Admiral Nagumo's last carrier. At 13:30 hours on June 6th, Japanese submarine I-168 launches 4 torpedoes, striking the still-floating Yorktown and the destroyer Haman. The destroyer goes down within 4 minutes. At 14:45 hours, 112 attackers from the Hornet and the Enterprise begin a series of attacks on the crippled Mogami and Mikuma. The 2 ships are struck a combined total of 7 times. The damaged Mogami makes it back to port, but is out of commission for over a year, and the Mikuma sinks. At 0600 hours on June 7th, the Yorktown, smashed and sinking, finally succumbs to her battle wounds and disappears beneath the waves. The Battle of Midway belonged to the Americans. With American Admiral Jack Spruance's anticipation and planning, the Americans were able to use a small and undermanned unit to destroy the Japanese air component, forcing Admiral Yamamoto to abandon his plans of retaking Midway. This battle clearly points out the importance of air power.